Ever wondered why sometimes your thoughts seem to betray you, leading you down paths of confusion and misinterpretation? Welcome to the labyrinth of the mind, where not everything is as it seems. Today, we delve into the fascinating and often baffling world of irrational thinking. What is it, you ask? Well, irrational thinking, also known as cognitive distortion, is a concept in psychology that refers to systematic ways our minds can convince us of something that isn't really true. These inaccurate thoughts reinforce negative thinking or emotions, telling us things about ourselves and the world around us that, quite simply, aren't accurate. Think of it as a mental mirage, a trick of the mind that appears real but crumbles under closer examination. It's like seeing water in the middle of a desert, only to realize it's just the sun playing tricks on your eyes. We've all experienced irrational thinking, whether we're conscious of it or not. It's that little voice in your head that whispers of impending doom when you make a tiny mistake, or the one that convinces you that if something bad can happen, it will happen to you. Imagine this. You've just finished giving a presentation at work. While everyone else congratulates you, your mind is stuck on that one slide you stuttered on. Suddenly, you're convinced you failed. Despite the applause, all you can think about is that one singular moment of imperfection. That, my friends, is irrational thinking. It's a common occurrence happening to the best of us. It's part of being human. But the power of irrational thinking lies not in its existence, but in its influence over our lives. It can shape our perception of reality, color our interactions, and even impact our decision-making capabilities. It's a quiet puppeteer, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. So why explore irrational thinking? Understanding these cognitive distortions allows us to recognize their presence in our lives, giving us the power to challenge and change these thought patterns. It's like shining a light on those sneaky mental mirages, revealing them for what they truly are, illusions. In the next few minutes, we'll journey into the world of irrational thinking and cognitive distortions, uncovering their many faces and how they influence our lives. What are cognitive distortions, you might ask? Well, cognitive distortions are essentially the ways in which our mind convinces us of something that isn't necessarily true. They're inaccurate thoughts that usually reinforce negative thinking or emotions, telling ourselves things that sound rational and accurate, but really only serve to keep us feeling bad about ourselves. Cognitive distortions have their roots in cognitive therapy, a branch of psychology that focuses on changing problematic thinking patterns. The concept was first proposed by Aaron Beck, an American psychiatrist, and was later developed by David Burns, an American psychiatrist and author. They identified a number of common cognitive distortions that we all fall prey to some degree. So, what are these cognitive distortions? They come in many forms, and we'll be exploring each one in detail in the coming scenes. But to give you a brief overview, they include things like overgeneralization, where we make broad interpretations from a single or few events. There's catastrophizing, where we expect disaster to strike no matter what. Or emotional reasoning, where we let our feelings guide our interpretation of reality. And the fallacy of change, where we expect others to change to suit our expectations. It's important to remember that everyone experiences cognitive distortions to some extent. They're a normal part of human cognition. But when they become habitual, they can lead to chronic problems like anxiety and depression. That's why it's so important to be aware of them. By recognizing these distortions in our own thinking, we can challenge them and ultimately change the way we think, feel, and behave. Think about it like this. Our thoughts are like the glasses through which we see the world. If our glasses are smudged or distorted, so will be our perception of reality. But by understanding and correcting our cognitive distortions, we can clean our glasses and see the world as it truly is. Now that we've set the stage, it's time to delve deeper into each type of cognitive distortion. First on our list is overgeneralization. This cognitive distortion is a bit like painting with far too broad a brush. It's when we take one event, one instance, or one piece of evidence and extend it out to create an all-encompassing rule. Let's take an example. Suppose you've just given a presentation at work and it didn't go as well as you'd hoped. If you're overgeneralizing, you might think, "I'm terrible at presentations. I always mess them up." You're taking one event and generalizing it to all similar events, past and future. But is it fair? Is it accurate? Probably not. So what's the problem with overgeneralizing? Well, it can lead to negative thought patterns and self-beliefs that simply aren't true. It can create a world in your mind where you're always the one who messes up, or where things never go right for you. This kind of thinking can make you feel stuck, and it can prevent you from seeing opportunities for growth and change. Overgeneralization can also affect how we see others. If someone does something that annoys or upsets us, we might generalize that behavior to their entire personality. For example, if a friend cancels plans with you, you might think, "They're always so unreliable. I can't count on them for anything." Again, this is taking one event and applying it to all similar events, which can damage relationships and create unnecessary conflict. So, how do we combat overgeneralization? The key is to challenge these sweeping statements when they come up. Ask yourself, is this really always true? Are there exceptions? It's about taking a step back and looking at the situation more objectively, rather than letting that one event color your entire perspective. Overgeneralization can be a tricky trap, but awareness is the first step to overcoming it. So, next time you find yourself making a sweeping statement, pause and ask yourself if you're painting with too broad a brush. It's a simple step, but it can make a world of difference in the way you think and feel. Next up, we're tackling catastrophizing. Imagine this. You're preparing for a big presentation at work. Suddenly, you're hit with a thought. What if I forget my lines? What if everyone laughs at me? What if I get fired? This, my friends, is a classic example of catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is a cognitive distortion where we blow things out of proportion and predict the worst possible outcome. It's like looking at the world through a lens of doom and gloom, where every minor setback becomes a major disaster. Let's delve into another example. Say you've been on a couple of dates with someone you really like. Then they don't respond to your text for a day. Instead of considering plausible explanations, like they might be busy or their phone died, you immediately jump to the conclusion that they've lost interest in you. This is catastrophizing. You see, catastrophizing doesn't just magnify the negatives, it also minimizes the positives. You could ace 99% of your presentation, and yet, if you fumble on one point, you may consider the whole thing a colossal failure. This distortion leads us to live in a constant state of stress and anxiety, as we're always expecting the worst. It can affect our decisions, our relationships, and even our physical health. But here's the good news. Once we recognize that we're catastrophizing, we can start to challenge these irrational thoughts. We can ask ourselves, is it really likely that I'll get fired for one mistake? Or could there be other reasons why they didn't respond to my text? By questioning these catastrophic predictions, we can start to see them for what they really are, distortions of reality. We can then replace them with more balanced and rational thoughts, reducing our anxiety and improving our overall well-being. Remember, it's natural to worry about things from time to time, but when we catastrophize, we turn molehills into mountains and rob ourselves of peace of mind. Catastrophizing can lead us to unnecessary worry. Recognizing it is the key to reducing its influence. Now, let's delve into emotional reasoning. Imagine a moment when you felt a surge of fear, anxiety, or sadness. Did you ever think, I feel it, therefore it must be true? That, my friends, is the essence of emotional reasoning. It's a cognitive distortion where we believe that what we feel must be an accurate reflection of reality. In other words, our emotions become the evidence of truth. Let's paint a picture. Consider John, who's recently started a new job. He feels overwhelmed and thinks, I feel so incompetent. I must be terrible at my job. This is emotional reasoning. John's feelings of incompetence don't necessarily mean he's bad at his job. It could simply be the stress of adjusting to a new environment. Or take another example, Emily, who's been single for a while. She feels lonely and assumes, I feel lonely, so I must be unlovable. Again, this is emotional reasoning. Emily's loneliness doesn't prove she's unlovable. It's just a feeling that she's experiencing at the moment. So why is it important to recognize emotional reasoning? Well, it can distort our perception of reality and lead us to make decisions based on inaccurate information. It can shape our self-image, our relationships, and our worldview in ways that may not be helpful or accurate. But here's the good news. We can learn to challenge emotional reasoning. We can remind ourselves that feelings aren't facts. They're important, yes, but they're not always accurate reflections of reality. We can learn to question our feelings, to ask ourselves, is this feeling based on fact, or is it just a feeling? By doing this, we can begin to separate our emotions from the truth. We can learn to see our feelings as just one piece of the puzzle, not the whole picture. And most importantly, we can learn to make decisions based on a more balanced view of reality. Emotional reasoning can cloud our judgment, but we can learn to see through the fog. Finally, we explore the fallacy of change. This cognitive distortion is a tricky one, and it's likely something we've all fallen for at one point or another. The fallacy of change revolves around the belief that we can and should change other people's behavior, attitudes, or beliefs to suit our expectations. It's a distorted thinking pattern where we convince ourselves that our happiness relies on altering others. Imagine this. You're in a relationship with someone who isn't particularly expressive with their feelings. Rather than accepting this aspect of their personality, you believe that if you can just make them more emotionally open, everything will be perfect. That, dear listener, is the fallacy of change in action. Or consider a situation at work. You have a colleague who's always late with their reports. Instead of finding ways to manage the situation, you convince yourself that if you could just get them to be more organized, your work life would be significantly better. Sound familiar? That's because the fallacy of change is an all too common cognitive distortion. It's a belief that places unrealistic expectations on others and, in turn, on ourselves. It can lead to feelings of frustration, disappointment, and resentment when these changes we so strongly desire don't materialize. It's important to remember that while we can influence others, we cannot control them. People change at their own pace and for their own reasons. Believing otherwise can lead to a cycle of disappointment and frustration. Understanding the fallacy of change helps us recognize when we're placing undue expectations on others. It encourages us to focus on what we can control, our own actions and attitudes. It's about accepting others for who they are and finding happiness in our own growth and development. In the grand scheme of things, being aware of this fallacy is a step towards healthier relationships, be it at work, with friends, or in our personal lives. It promotes understanding, acceptance, and realistic expectations. The fallacy of change can set us up for disappointment, but understanding it helps us set more realistic expectations. We've journeyed through the maze of cognitive distortions. In the landscape of our minds, irrational thinking often poses as rational, masquerading as truth when it's often just a distortion. We've explored 4 common cognitive distortions: overgeneralization, catastrophizing, emotional reasoning, and the fallacy of change. Each of these distortions, though different in nature, share a common thread. They skew our perception of reality. Overgeneralization is the act of taking a single event and expanding it into a never-ending pattern of defeat. Catastrophizing, on the other hand, is the distortion where we magnify the importance of an event or situation, turning molehills into mountains in our minds. Emotional reasoning is the belief that our feelings are fact, assuming that if we feel it, it must be true. Lastly, the fallacy of change is the belief that we can control and change other people's actions, behaviors, or thoughts. These distortions can seep into our daily lives, subtly influencing our decisions and behaviors, often leading to anxiety, depression, and overall negativity. They can make us feel trapped in a cycle of unhelpful thoughts and feelings. But remember, they are just distortions, not reality. The key to overcoming these distortions is awareness. By recognizing these patterns of irrational thinking, we can challenge them, question their validity, and replace them with more realistic and beneficial thoughts. It's not an overnight process, but with consistent effort, we can retrain our brains to think more clearly and objectively. Cognitive distortions are not a sign of weakness, but a part of the human condition. We all experience them to some extent. Understanding and acknowledging them is the first step towards mental resilience and emotional well-being. In this journey of self-awareness and self-improvement, remember that it's okay to ask for help. Reach out to mental health professionals if you need guidance. You're not alone in this journey. Being aware of these distortions empowers us to navigate life's challenges with a clearer mind and a healthier perspective.